pieces together. We're streaming on YouTube and on LinkedIn, and we got our folks with us here on Zoom. So let's talk about making a group decision. So this is one of my favorite topics, as I'm sure you'll see as we start to walk through all of this. So this fits within our team leadership series that we do. And as you can see, if you look at some of the previous ones, we've talked about how to go about making a good decision and use good decision hygiene for a single decision maker. This is where we're talking about multiple decision makers, quite a bit more complicated. So we'll walk through how to think about that and how to make sure that you're able to do that with good decision hygiene and with the ability to help create joy at work. And so as a reminder, this is how Roxanne and I think about joy at work. It's an employee's willingness to participate, commit, be accountable, trust, belong, and act with cohesion, adapt and grow, demonstrate respect, and act with integrity. And it exists when the company leaders and managers continually create the conditions and extend the invitation for employees to contribute this way, and employees constantly accept the invitation. So it's that back and forth of invitation and acceptance of the invitation that helps it to exist. And we see that as important, certainly for change, because of this circular connection that we have here. So change done well and how it's actually executed helps to improve joy at work, grows joy at work. And when joy at work grows, the very next change becomes even easier to do, and on in this positive cycle. And that's what we're hoping to achieve for you and for all of us. And the 10 dimensions that you see on the right-hand side are the indicators of joy at work, a way to understand if joy at work is present and even measure joy at work. And we're going to focus a bit on cohesion as we talk about a group decision. And when we say cohesion, this is what we mean. Cohesion is the willingness to work with a group as a united force to achieve the purpose of the group. And this is going to be important, as you'll see when we go through a group decision-making process, because you are making that either together or probably not at all, right? So you either figure out how to do it truly as a group, or you fail and you don't get to make it as a group. And so cohesion is going to be really important. And so even in the process of making the decision is going to have an impact on the amount of joy at work. So this is what we want to talk about. We want to talk about what good decision hygiene even means. So touch on that. And then this idea of making a values-based decision. So a decision is really ultimately about determining what all the decision makers want to have happen, both implicitly and explicitly, what they care about. And so we want to bring that to the front. And then we'll talk about how to make a true group decision. So give you a series of steps to take so that you can go do it yourself and be able to make a truly good decision with good decision hygiene, even within a group. So what does that mean? What is good decision hygiene? So a group decision is really a process of eliminating all the alternatives until you come down to one, right? You pick the one thing that you're going to do. And the way we want to do that is based on what each member of the group cares about. So before we get into that, let's just give you a little bit more landscape here about how we think about these things. And the first one's really not so much a decision as it is communicating a decision to step into a change. So you want to highlight that for them?
Yeah, this is a lot of how our work crosses over. So my background is in change and Ed's is in decision making. And we realize that they are two sides of the same coin. So this is an example of that. So once you have made a decision, then you need to introduce it. There is a way to do this so that you can introduce the decision without it and get input on it without changing the decision itself or confusing people. And it's by asking these three questions. What do you like about the decision? What do you find challenging about the decision? And what are your recommendations for overcoming the challenges? You can see in asking these questions, you're not asking people to weigh in on the decision itself. what you're doing is asking them to help you understand what the impact of that decision is and what kinds of things would make it easier for people to adopt the new decision. I'm using adopt in the framework of change because I see this as a change decision.
Yeah, and so as we move further over, then if you have not made the decision and you're the single decision maker, you're looking to get input, that's what the middle one's about. And we talked about that last month. So if you're interested in that, you can look at the recording, actually both of these last month. So an important distinction here is to make them distinct. So if you have made the decision, then you're talking about the first one. And you want to make sure you're representing it as, I have made the decision, now we're on to the change. The middle one is you haven't, and you're looking to get input from your team to be able to make the decision, to do a better job because you want more information and understand what the team knows so that you can make the right decision. But the third one, the one we're going to dive into today, is a true group decision. And this occurs in organizations all the time where a team of leaders have to get together to decide something because the impact of that decision has influence on all of them. And so it isn't just one person making it. You're not just kicking it up to the CEO to do. You truly have to make a group decision in order to be able to have the best possible answer for what you want your organization to go do. And we're going to go dive into the particulars of that. But really, the first idea around this notion of decision hygiene is it's about the process, right? It's not about the outcome. There are all kinds of uncertainty in any sort of decision, and probably even more so when you're making a group decision because of the nature of those sorts of decisions. And so you can always look back and say, oh, we didn't make the right decision because now you have all this information, you know what actually happened. But did you go through a good process and think about all those uncertainties and think about all of those risks? This is the value of getting the big group together, is to get those broad perspectives. And so we're going to talk about this process, but I did want to highlight a bit about what this is not as well, right? So this is not about negotiation. So negotiation has elements of trying to understand what people value and then trying to use that, but it's a different process than what we're talking about here. And it's not about voting, but in some ways voting is the opposite of this. You don't reveal what you value. You just simply make a selection. And then lastly, this is not about social planning, where a group usually within the government is making a decision, trying to understand the values of the constituents that they're paying attention to. So the process we're going to talk about may have utility or value, usefulness in all three of these, but these are not the things that we're going after. We're going after a true organizational group decision where all the members, all the stakeholders who are engaged have a say basically in the decision or have an input into it. And we want to pull all that together. And that input is what they value. And we want to talk about this idea of being values-based when you're making a decision. And we do mean this beyond just the values that companies would put up on the wall. Those may be included, but we're also want to be down into the values that each individual stakeholder has and what they care about within the confines of the organization, especially with regard to this particular decision. So let's just use an example. So let's say we're going back to the office, right? So it's happening all over the place, or not, or at least the decision is being put up for consideration. Should we be going back to the office or not? So let's think of a software development company that's trying to do that. And they may have these three things that they've talked about. We got to take care of our culture, and we're worried about productivity, and we want to pay attention to work-life balance. And those are great, right? So certainly those are values that are worth paying attention to. But that's probably not all. There could be others in there. And so it would be smart to get the leaders together to talk about what are all the other things that they would value. So we can use that as a way to pull it all in. So when you start thinking about, well, why would we go back to the office? And you start to ask all the people or your leaders what that might be. These are some of the things that might come up. It might be about inspiration and creativity. It might be about team building and communication. Those are could also be important things. And that broadens out the considerations that you might have when you start to think about what is the impact of actually going back to the office, and might start to pull you together to think about something like this, that you're really trying to focus in on doing something that you can't do while working remotely. So maybe that's really where the core value is going to come from, this idea of the thing that you're really trying to optimize around when you're picking your alternative, when you're making your decision and trying to figure out what is the thing that you want to go do. And so really just with this, if you just think about this, if the only thing that you do is say, what do you value? Then you'll be much further along than many groups are in their process of making a decision. And we'll talk more about what the implications of that are. But we have a guide to help you walk through that, right? So this will help you in understanding these three change decisions that we talked about, and give you some of the steps about just trying to pull out how to go about walking through these. And if you follow those steps, we are sure that your decision making, whether it's a group or individual, or just announcing a decision and starting to get into the change, those three are going to go better. And so you can see that what we have here is pretty nominal, right? $2. And we're not keeping that money. We're going to donate it to one of the three organizations you see here. Either the Red Cross, as it supports Ukraine for sad but obvious reasons. The JDRF is the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and Ricky's Refuge is an animal refuge organization of this enormous spread of land, and I don't even know how many animals, hundreds of animals that they keep there here in Virginia. And so we'll donate that money for the guide that we get from you for the guide. But we think that you'll get a bunch of value out of it and can walk through the qualitative steps for all three of these different decisions, all kind of zooming in on this idea of values and be able to take on values. But what we want to spend more time on, really the rest of our time, is on this idea of how do you make a true group decision. And again, that means that you're getting the people together and they all actually have a say in it. You know, one of the mistakes to make is to present something as a group decision when you are really the decision maker. That's a bad move. If you are really the decision maker, then treat it as that middle one that we talked about. Make sure you're clear about that you are the decision maker and the question that you're trying to answer. But if it's a true group decision and you're not voting or doing the other, you're not really negotiating here, you're really trying to come to what's essentially consensus on what the answer is going to be, then this is the process you want to follow. And we want to set this up so that at the end of it, people are satisfied with the decision. No one feels like they got run over or railroaded. They know that their voice has been heard and that their values have been considered as part of the decision. That's really the important part. And so we're coming back to these 5 steps. Now we'll step into them quite a bit more. And decision hygiene, it's really about how you decide, this how thing, which also shows up as you may know from other webinars and how we think about change. How you do it matters. Well, how you decide matters as well. And we want you to go through these 5 steps, and we'll go into each of them in a bit more detail. But if you can follow these 5 and even do them at kind of a high qualitative level, you're going to get a better group decision, guaranteed. So first, let's talk about the decision question. You want to declare the question that you're trying to decide here, and really put it in the form of a question, right? So that it's broad enough that it's really relating to the outcomes, not narrowing in on one specific thing. So probably a poor question is, should we purchase this software system or not? A better question would be, what is the way for us to get the outcomes that such a software system would give us? Because that starts to open you up to, are there other systems that we should look at? Maybe we don't want a system at all, and there's something else that we could do to get to the outcomes. But if you narrow it in on the actual outcome, you're not going to get as good and clean a decision as you might otherwise. So this is, for an example, let's stay with our office question, right? So making a decision about going back to the office, and our question that we might set up is, how do we start to use our office so that we increase productivity without negatively impacting the culture? So that's going to be our decision question that we'll use as we walk through here. Our second step is that we want to get our group of stakeholders together, and we want to try and choose them to be as broad as we can, because we want to get divergent points of view, relevant but divergent points of view about what is going on with this question, because we want to try and cover certainly all the possible risks and issues that might be out there, but also just because we might be able to get a better final answer as a result of pulling in more people and getting that diversity of thought in there. And this does, in our view, relate to the notion of stakeholders within a change context as well. So when we think of stakeholders in a change context, we're also thinking about understanding where they are, and we would even advocate mapping them and understanding impacts to them. Similarly here, we're trying to pull stakeholders in because they're going to have something to say about what's going on with this decision, and we'll make a better decision as a result of that.
Yeah, and one good way to test whether or not you have all the stakeholders, the right stakeholders involved in your group decision, is to imagine if you publish the list of people somewhere where the larger group could see who was involved. Would they react to that list of people by saying, yes, that's the right group of people, because I can see how my point of view is represented in one or more of these stakeholders? That's a really good test to determine, do you need to add any people or maybe swap out some people, because that it would make more sense to have certain stakeholders involved in the decision.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Love that test. You make it really clear and transparent.
Yeah. What reactions would you get?
What would people say? All right. So you got your group together. You've used Roxanne's test to make sure that you have the right people together. And now what we want to do is start to understand, what do these folks care about? And what do they value? And you could start off with just this question: what's the one thing that each of the stakeholders cares about most? Because that will start to get people thinking in terms of the magnitude of them, not just a laundry list of things. Although in the process that we would advocate, we would say, go ahead and have people also continue to do that and actually write out all of the other things that they value. And then what we want to do is try and get them into a bit of a hierarchy. And we have done this with sticky notes on a table. So this does not need to be some sort of a sophisticated process, with everyone around the table trying to talk about what seems to connect or lead into what. So in this case here, let's say we pulled together a bunch of things. We got 11 on the page right here, and I've had a conversation with the stakeholders about what they all are. And so the green ones are kind of at that third level. We get into consistent communication, and we want to stay in line with our values and be transparent. And those are fine, but they're not very specific yet. As we get to the orange ones, start to get a little bit more specific. So retention and coordination and positive press about going back to the office, keep clear about why we want to go back to the office. But in our imaginary setup here, the three that the group came up with is the true N1, the ones that we're really going to use to evaluate whether or not the alternative is the best alternative or not, are the three that you see in the tan color. Right. So we're going to keep, or at least maybe even increase productivity, strengthen the culture, and we want to mitigate the transition risk, the actual risk of going back that could be generated by going back to the office, and understand what those are, because that's what we're going to use to measure the alternatives and see, are the various alternatives that we have, which one is going to be the best. And we're literally measuring it here. So we want to get to the place where we now can come up with the alternatives, and the part B of that would then be to evaluate the alternatives. So the four of the pieces that we had within the values that we had before are now across the top: transparent process, high retention, positive press, etc. They're all in there. And what we want to try and do is come up with ideas on how we would take care of these and really spread our thinking. And so we want to go to start with pretty conventional kind of stuff and then push your thinking and maybe kind of loony things that you might come up with to try and really stretch what the possibilities are. So if you think about something like positive press, right, the first one might be issue a press release. Well, that's, that's pretty conventional. But then you might move into something that pushes you a little bit, like, hey, we might do an op-ed campaign and try, or might do a letter writing campaign and try and get those into the newspaper or get them into online publications. You might even do something like underwrite a documentary about how inclusive your process is. And if you think that's pretty wacky, right now there is a documentary series that the Formula One people app actually put out through Netflix, and that's how they're trying to get into the US market. So all kinds of things happen. And by pushing your thinking, you can start to get a broad list of possibilities. And we're going to use this list as components and try and put them together to create a set of alternatives. So let's walk through what that is. And we're literally going to use this idea of a walk. We're going to walk across all of the pieces that we have here, grab one component from each of the columns and try and put something together and create an alternative. And then we're going to do it again and again in order to make a series of alternatives. So, here's an example. Let's say we start off and we're going to have a town hall so we can have a discussion about this. And we might post the plan that we put together on the company website and include all the employee suggestions. And then we decide that we're creating back to the office bonuses of some kind in order to keep our retention. And we keep pushing along, and we do actually do the boring press release and decide to put that out there because we want that to be out into the community. But we're going to engage the company in a company-wide discussion about our why and how the office contributes to the why of the company. And so that gets to our first alternative. And our first alternative is this town hall focused communication to guide the process with significant external transparency. Right. So that's one. That may be a terrible one, but at least we've created one, right? We didn't come up with the answer yet. We're using this process to come up with hopefully interesting alternatives that get us thinking. And now we would go and do it again and do another walkthrough and create another alternative and keep doing it until you feel like, yeah, we've really exhausted our thinking and we have a decent set of alternatives to be able to look at. And then now you want to evaluate them. And at this level, we're going pretty qualitative, right? We just want to know, does this alternative meet those 3 TAN objectives that we have better or worse than another alternative? We're just trying to get a little bit of a stack ranking going on there and use that as a way to figure out which alternative is better. You can take this to a very detailed, very quantitative level and use that as a way to come up with a complex decision. And companies do this to do things that are really difficult across multiple stakeholders. You may have dozens of things that you value and you're trying to balance all of them. But it doesn't have to be at that level. You can do it at a pretty light qualitative level. Is this one better than the other ones? If it is, well, it doesn't really matter what its level of goodness of better is, just that it's better. And as a group, you've decided that it's better. So this is a really important idea around decision making and happens all the time, right? So we think of a decision as an irrevocable allocation of resources, and it is very often that people will say that they've made a decision, but they don't make an irrevocable allocation of resources. That's the phenomena of being in a meeting when someone pops up and goes, hey, didn't we decide this a few weeks ago? And the answer is no, you didn't decide it because you didn't allocate the resources. You may have had a good discussion. You may have even come up with the right thing that you want to go do, but you haven't done that very last step. And at a minimum, the next part of that step is to communicate it. So to make a decision is at a minimum to at least communicate it. If there are people to go redirect and monies to be spent and projects to be started or stopped, well, that starts to get into the irrevocable allocation of resources. But at least get to the place where you're communicating it. And then the first alternative example that we gave, the communication is actually embedded in it. right? We're going to have a town hall focused communication to guide the process so that we get this significant external transparency. So we made it easy for ourselves because we know the mechanism that we want to go do this with. We're picking a town hall. And in our stack of ways to communicate, this would be the highest touch. And that probably makes sense when you're coming out of a pandemic, trying to decide if you're going to change how you've been working for 2 years and start pulling people back into the office. That would not be a smart thing to just post it via an email and say, everyone back in the office. Although we've actually seen some companies try and do that. And it hasn't gone so great. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a high touch thing.
Back to the how part, right? And so this is another area where change and decision crosses over. As if you've ever been part of communicating something, you might think you've decided something, but then when you write it down and you're about to communicate it, people will start to say, well, wait, I'm not so sure that was the decision. Back to the irrevocable allocation of resources, right? So maybe they're not ready to make that allocation. But to continue on this, when you're at this point, you could use the first decision-making technique that we talked about very briefly, where you're announcing this decision, this change decision, and you ask folks, what do they like about it? What do they find challenging? And what recommendations do they have for overcoming the challenge? That could be a technique that you decide to employ when you're at this part of a decision-making process.
Yeah, and so it fits great in here, and it's a good distinction, right? So if you've come in as a group and you've made the decision, what you're talking about in the town hall is what Roxanne is describing. So you're getting input on how that decision is going to be implemented, so how the change is going to happen. What you don't want to do is set it up as a somehow group company decision-making process where people can say, we're not doing it, that's a terrible decision. Otherwise, you're going to lose the control of the crowd, lose the opportunity to actually do something useful here. It's going to become a complaint session. So how you do that really is going to matter. And the first part of that is to be clear about what the purpose of this town hall is and the purpose of what you're trying to do. If you truly want to get input from the group about that,
That's
then
different.
Totally different.
Exactly.
Right.
That's
So
different.
you don't come in with, hey, we've made a decision, and then, take arrows in the chest and then decide, okay, yeah, I don't really like that decision. That would be bad decision hygiene. So if you think that's going to be useful, then you want to set it up that way as a way to provide input in. You're going to make a decision, you want to get input from the company, but you're going to be the decision maker.
Yeah.
So be clear about which of those three you're doing.
And just to add to that, people want to feel confident. They want to feel confident in the decision. And part of that is how you announce it, just to state the obvious.
Very important. So to just review our 5 steps. First, you want to state the decision question and get that up front, and please put it in the form of a question. That will help you out tremendously. Then get your stakeholder group together and go broad and bring in stakeholders that are going to be relevant to the decision, and then get the values from them. What do they value? So that when they're looking at the possibilities, what is the process that's going through their head to evaluate them? And then you're going to do that as a group. Pick your values and evaluate the various alternatives that you have in order to make your choice. And then finally, be super clear in the communication and get that out to your impacted group.
What Ed has described here sounds pretty complicated, right? It's a process. There's steps to it. There's ways to go about each of these steps. He's described all this, but this is also relevant for the most simple decision that is, that has a group components. So we use the example all the time of the group decision of deciding where to go to lunch, and how frustrating that could be for everyone involved because the alternatives just keep getting knocked down. So it can be frustrating because you don't understand what people value. If you start with the question, what do you value? Then you can start to understand, oh, they value this in a restaurant. These people value that in a restaurant. Let's come up with alternatives that will satisfy all of those things that folks value. So just asking that question, while it may seem kind of silly at first, it really does solve a lot, and you can get to your better answer sooner. We do this all the time when we start when we think about, okay, where do we want to go to dinner or wherever, we will, if we don't have an answer right away, we will ask the question, okay, well, what do you value? Okay, well, I value this and I value that. Okay, great. So then we come to our decision. It's actually more fun and definitely not frustrating.
Definitely not frustrating. That part is wonderful.
Yes.
All right. So what we've talked about, this whole idea of good decision hygiene, and it's really about the process. That's what we're advocating for here. And at the heart of that process of good decision hygiene is what people value. And you really know at the end that you've made the decision when you have an irrevocable allocation of resources, people, money, time, whatever that is. So if they've been allocated, then you've made the decision and you know that you're done from there. So we wish you the best of luck with pulling all that together. That's the end of what we wanted to talk about today. Our next webinar is going to be on change leadership, authentic change leadership, which will be in a few weeks, so after Thanksgiving. And that will conclude our series of topics that we put together for this year. In December, we'll actually be doing a workshop. So we'll be putting more information out there about that. So looking for a much more interactive exchange between us and all of you. So we hope that you'll find some interest in that, but we'll be putting more interest out there soon.
Some actual practice and a tool takeaway that you can use afterwards.
Right. So we're actually looking forward to doing that. That's going to be pretty great. And if you haven't got time for those things, but are interested in more how this connects into data and using the data to help you make a decision and then help drive a change, this is the course that we've got. So we have this data-driven change management. It's a self-paced course with video lessons in it, but we also do live simulations every few months or so. We have 4 scheduled, but we have done more in the past as interest has popped up. So we'll add them in if we get a bunch of people that are interested. And in those live simulations, we're driving through a fictitious example to be able to have you practice what you've learned within the course itself. So you'll be able to move from getting all kinds of possibilities of data, so even things that are just interesting but not necessarily useful, and really getting to the useful stuff and being able to grab the right metrics. We'll talk about all of that. Happens across 5 lessons and those 9 different tools, and then we'll try them out live in a simulation. You can come to as many of those simulations as you want. Once you're in, we'll just keep notifying you when they pop up, and we change them each time to make them a little bit different. So even coming to multiples, you're not repeating the same thing again and again. You get a slightly different point of view. And that's it for what we wanted to talk about with this session. So thank you for taking the time to hang out with us, maybe have some lunch while you're viewing, and think about group decision making. As always, Roxanne and I are very interested in hearing what you think about these things. If you have ideas for topics, many of the topics that we did in the last few months came from things that people had suggested to us. And so we're trying to react to that to make sure that we're delivering things that would be useful, that you would actually find valuable and can take back with you. So here are all the different ways that you can contact us or check in on some of the things that we're writing as well. And with that, I think we will close. Thank you all very much. Great to have you here with us. See you next time.
Bye.